Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. For the month of August, we are giving our team a little bit of a break and bringing back to you some of our favorite episodes from the past 3+ years of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. We're reaching back into the archives. We're actually giving you 2 episodes a week. Today's episode is a mashup of some listener questions that I've answered over the years. The first question is from Suzanne, and she wants to know what to do when her 6-year-old son is defiant. She wants to know what to do when her son isn't doing what she asks him to do. And I just want to remind us, I don't feel like I called this out explicitly enough in the podcast, but I just want to remind us that the first step is always to look at what we're asking our children to do. Because sometimes we're just being power-tripping grown-ups and we like our idea better than their idea. And we always want to make sure that the requests that we're making are reasonable and necessary. So we always want to start there when our kid isn't doing what we're asking them to do. And then we can go on and try some of the ideas that I get into in this answer. The next questions are some listener questions about what to do if you have what I call a runner, a kid who runs away from you a lot. Another question is about what to do when your child prefers one parent over another. And the final question is what to do when your family actively and openly disagrees with your parenting choices. If you do have a question for me, you can go to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/podcast and record a question there like Suzanne, one of our listeners, did. Or you can just send it to me and ask me if I would consider answering it on the podcast. I love doing these kind of Dear Abby style podcast episodes where I just go through and answer a bunch of questions. So let's listen to the first part, which is a listener question from Suzanne, and then the next part, which is another episode where I answered 3 written to me listener questions.
Hi, Sarah. I had the privilege to talk with you one day, but my question is, my son just turned 6 in April, and he recently began to behave defiantly. I tell him the things he has to do beforehand because I know it's better. It gives him a space for him to decide whether he wants to pick up his toys 5 minutes before or 10 minutes before going to bed and stuff like that, right? But even he doesn't want to do what I ask, and he questions me a lot. For example, I tell him, Noah, you have 10 minutes before bathing, so you can pick up your toys whenever you decide. Or which shirt do you prefer to wear, the red one or the green one? He still becomes very rebellious, and I sit with him, I talk with him, but then he goes back to the same thing. And if I say white, he says black. If I say yes, he says no. Or if I say no, he says yes. So I really don't know how to deal with this right now.
Okay, Suzanne, I'm so sorry that you are going through this. This sounds so frustrating to be putting so much effort into giving your son choices and giving him some autonomy, and you're still getting defiance. And that's just really frustrating. 6-year-olds can be challenging for sure. So first of all, I want to say that's great that you're giving choices and that you're preparing him for what's to come. It sounds like you have a strong-willed child, which is probably no surprise to you to hear that. But it's really important to give strong-willed kids as much autonomy as possible. In fact, that's one of our 3 big ideas behind parenting strong-willed kids. They might not all apply to you here, but I'm just going to quickly review them because I think it's good for everyone to hear them. And I know that a lot of our listeners do also have strong-willed kids. So the first big idea is to work on your relationship because all kids, but especially strong-willed kids, have to feel close to us and connected to us. And that makes them more likely to want to cooperate with us. And they have to care what we think. The second big idea is to give as much autonomy as possible. That's what I was just referring to. And then the third big idea is finding win solutions. A few weeks ago, I taught a workshop, like an extensive, really in detail workshop on parenting your strong-willed child. And if you missed that, I do still have the recording available for purchase. If anyone's interested, feel free to shoot me an email, send me a DM, and I will send you more details about that, the Raising Your Strong-Willed Child workshop. It's going to go into a lot more detail than we will be able to get into today. But let's see what I can do to help you out, Suzanne. As I said, wonderful that you're giving him choices and preparing, and you're saying, do you want to clean up your toys now, or do you want to do it in a few minutes because we're going to be having a bath in 10 minutes? Do you want to wear the red shirt or do you want to wear the green shirt? So that's great. The thing is that he's still not doing what you ask him to do. So whenever we have, with our children, whenever we have an expectation for what we want them to do, and then we have the reality for what they're actually doing, and there's a gap in between that expectation and reality. If you could see me, I'm holding my hands, one up in the air and on one side of me and one up in the air on the other side of me. And I'm showing you this gap between our expectations and reality. And that's what you're having right now, this expectation that he's going to clean up his toys, or the expectation that he's going to get dressed, and he's not doing it. In traditional parenting or more conventional parenting, parents use basically fear, yelling, threats, consequences, or the flip side of threats and consequences, which is rewards. That's what they use to close that gap between our expectations and reality. If we don't want to use threats, yelling, consequences, or rewards to close the gap between expectations and realities, if we drop out that set of tools of conventional parenting, we have to add in something else. And so what peaceful parenting tools do we need to add in here today? Now, this is just the first thing that I'm going to tell you is just a piece of the puzzle. And there is a part 2 that I want to get to afterwards. But part 1 is let's find a win solution. So that's what I mentioned earlier. Is one of our big 3 ideas of parenting strong-willed kids is finding a win solution. So as you've mentioned, he doesn't want to clean up his toys and come and get ready for the bath. That's what you want him to do. His agenda is probably keep playing and not take a bath, right? So your agenda and his agenda are not in alignment. A win solution is a really great way to bring our agendas in alignment with our child's agenda. So what that might look like, as you heard me say, he wants to keep playing. So a win solution in this situation would be, how can you make it fun? So how can you make the cleanup time fun? What kind of scaffolding do we need to put in place to get him to cooperate? Making it fun is what we want to look at in this case. When we have that gap between our expectations and reality, the peaceful parenting tool I mentioned, bringing in a win solution, that's scaffolding or support to help our child meet our expectations. So making it fun, putting on a song, putting on his favorite song or the latest movie soundtrack that he likes or whatever, and having a cleanup dance party. You could say, okay, let's pretend we're cleaning up robots and we're going to clean up. Or maybe he's a robot and you've got the remote control, or something that's fun and playful. And I know that it takes effort. It takes effort for us to find that fun, find that creativity. And we have to be at least in a neutral mood, if not having resources, good resources, to being in a good mood. But we have to at least be in a neutral mood. And it does take energy. It is work. I will not deny that. But it also sounds like it's been a lot of work to try to get him to cooperate without using these win solutions, right? Without trying to engage him in play to encourage him to cooperate. And the creativity point. I know as adults, we often have lost our ability to play because we haven't been using it and our play muscles get rusty. Follow what he likes already. Most 6-year-olds have interests. Maybe he loves a particular themed show, or maybe he loves certain animals. When my son was that age, he loved monkeys. So we could pretend to be monkeys cleaning up the living room. Anything that your son is already interested in, engage in that to see if you can get him to come on board with your expectation, which is that he tidies up. A couple other brief ideas finding those win solutions. Increasing connection is always really powerful. It's time to stop playing. I know you don't want to. Maybe we have a quick hug and a snuggle, or maybe you need 100 kisses, a hug that doesn't end, and see if that might make him a little bit more willing to go along with what you're asking him to do and to close that gap between your expectations and the reality of what's going on. Another great way to get kids on board and have that win solution is to give them something to look forward to. I like to think of this as bridging the task that they don't want to do. So he doesn't want to put his toys away, but maybe you could get him excited about the bath. What kind of bubble bath are you going to use tonight? Or what are you going to play when you're in the bathtub? Or maybe if the bath itself is also something that he doesn't want to do, he doesn't want to clean up, he doesn't want to take a bath, what kind of thing can he have to look forward to after that? Like, how many stories will you read? Is there a chapter of his favorite book that you're going to be reading? Are you going to have special time after the bathtub? So giving him something to look forward to can be another great way of finding that win solution. So basically, part one here of your question is that we've got to find a creative, peaceful parenting tool way to close that gap between the expectations and reality. Choices often work really well, but that's not cutting it in your case. Giving him the choice of when he wants to clean it up is not enough because he's just not motivated to clean up. So how can we find that win solution? Give him that motivation to clean up, whether it's because you're making it fun, whether you're offering to do more connection with him, whether you are giving him something to look forward to, something to move towards. That's what we want to do here to get that cooperation and to reduce the defiance that he's experiencing, or rather that you're experiencing, the defiance you're experiencing. The second part of this question, you said that when you say white, says black, and that he's just being a little bit, let's say a little bit provocative, a little bit obstinate, saying the opposite of whatever it is that you are saying. To me, that seems like a little bit of a red flag, a little bit of a warning sign that things in your relationship are quite fraught right now. And again, I could be wrong because all I have is this 90-second recording that you left for me. But often when I have clients who have strong-willed kids, what I find is that when the kids are just really being provocative, there are two main things that are going on. One is that the relationship is strained and that the child, no matter how fun you might make it, and what I've seen sometimes, the parents who do go to these great lengths to make it fun and the child starts to cooperate and then realizes they're cooperating and then stops, is because they are locked in a little bit of a power struggle. I don't want to cooperate with you because I'm angry with you because things have felt really tense and hard between us. So if it feels like your relationship has been hard for a little while and you think that might be part of the reason why he's just saying the opposite of whatever you ask him, that he's being deliberately provocative because things have felt stressful or tense or fraught, as I said, work on your connection. So maybe forget about, for the moment, trying to get cooperation, let go of whatever you can. Make sure you're doing special time every day. Make sure you're taking the time to find those micro moments of connection and delight in him, so that you can really improve the tone and temperature of your relationship. I think that's what maybe happened, is that you're maybe stuck in a little bit of a pattern of fighting and not getting along. So really do all of the peaceful parenting things that you know to do. We'll put a resource in the show notes for some connection strategies that you can use. And really just make sure that you are working on your relationship, because I think that maybe you've just gotten in this adversarial position with each other and having this bad habit of the relationship feeling difficult. So that's one thing that can make kids act like that. The other thing that can make kids act like that is when they have a full emotional backpack. If you listen to the podcast for a while, you know that I talk a lot about the emotional backpack, which is a metaphor that was developed by my mentor, Dr. Laura Markham. And it's really a metaphor for our bodies. And it's when we are experiencing things that are difficult, that we haven't been able to process in the moment, tensions, stresses, big feelings that we haven't been able to process and feel and then let them go, we hold on to them in our bodies. And our body is that emotional backpack. It's a metaphor for our body. So if he's carrying a lot of tensions and stresses around with him, maybe school is a little bit hard, maybe you or your partner, if you have one, have been stressed lately, and there are some things that have been building up, kids will be a little bit provocative in order to find an outlet to empty their emotional backpack. So it may feel like he's picking fights with you because he's looking for a way to offload some of those difficult feelings. Okay, Suzanne, I hope that was helpful. Sending you a big hug. It is no fun trying to move through the schedule with a 6-year-old who's not cooperating. Okay, let's move on to the next questions. I want to remind you, if you don't know, that I have a free course about how to stop yelling at your kids. And if you would like to check that out, along with a whole bunch of other free resources that I have on my website, go to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/resources for the free How to Stop Yelling course, and also lots of cheat sheets and ebooks and downloads that you can get there all for free. So check those out, and let's move into the next questions. This listener asks, my son, who's now 4, simply gets so excited when he sees something outdoors or in shopping malls that he just makes a run for it with no fear of losing me. I have to keep such an eye on him all the time and have explained to him several times that he could easily get lost and mommy might not be able to find him. He's always been like that ever since he started walking. His younger sister, who's turning 3 soon, is nothing like that and always needs to be close to me. What should I do? First of all, let's understand why this is happening. So a child who's 4 still does not have any impulse control. Impulse control is purely a brain hardware development. And what impulse control is when your thinking brain or your prefrontal cortex can be active at the same time as your impulsive brain, your amygdala and your limbic system. I hope that we don't have any neuroscientists listening, or if you are listening, you don't think I do a half-bad job of explaining brain science for this purpose. But anyways, the limbic system or amygdala is where our big feelings come from, whether we're dysregulated because we're upset or excited. So in this case, this mom says her kid's excited, sees something at the mall, or maybe sees a puppy at the playground or something like that and just runs off. And so what happens is that with little kids, there's not a connection between those two parts of the brain yet. So Dan Siegel talks about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. So the downstairs brain is the amygdala and the limbic system, and the upstairs brain is the thinking brain or the prefrontal cortex. And between the ages of 5 and 7 is when a staircase between the two parts of the brain starts to develop, a staircase between that upstairs brain and downstairs brain. Before that, and for some kids, it's even later, if they're neurodivergent or if they're really sensitive, it can be more like 7 to 9 before that part of their brain starts to develop, that staircase. And that what that staircase does is allows both parts of the brain to be active at the same time, as I mentioned. So when that impulse comes up, oh, there's a puppy, but the puppy's across the street, and mom says I shouldn't run out into the street, that excitement about seeing the puppy is still there, but also that rule or that guideline of don't run out into the street is also still there, right? So the prefrontal cortex is actually putting the brakes on the impulse that's coming from the amygdala. And so that's what impulse control is, when we know, okay, that person just made me really angry, but I'm not going to punch them or whatever because I don't want to hurt them or I don't want to be arrested. That is our thinking brain putting the brakes on our impulsive brain. And little kids before the ages of 5 and 7, which is when it develops, or 7 to 9, they just don't have that connection yet in their brain, that brain wiring that makes impulse control possible. And you might be saying, but Sarah, the woman just said her other child, who's not even 3 yet, does not run off places when her mom tells her not to. This is the thing, that child actually doesn't have the impulses. And that's what can be confusing for a lot of parents. And I especially see this in junior kindergarten, where parents will tell me, oh, my child's teacher said that we need to work on his impulse control, and because he can't sit at circle time and he gets up and walks around or pokes his friend or looks out the window or whatever. And meanwhile, there are, other children who sit just fine at circle time and they don't get up and they just listen to the teacher reading the story. This is the thing. The child that gets up and walks around at circle time and the child who's listening to the story have the exact same amount of impulse control. It's just that the child who's sitting and listening doesn't have the impulses to get up and walk around. So it's not that they have better impulse control. They just don't have the impulses. Same thing with this listener and her 2 children. Her 4-year-old has the impulses to run away. Sounds like he's maybe spirited and a little not too fearful of strangers or strange situations, whereas her daughter is. So what can you do about it now that we have talked about how your 4-year-old maybe just does not have impulse control yet? And so no matter how many times you tell him, this listener said that she's talked to him about how he needs to stay where mommy can see him and how it could be dangerous, etc. Those are all the things that live in his thinking brain, right? And as we just said, those all go out the window. So you can talk to him 20 more times or 100 more times, and still those things will go out the window when he gets excited and wants to go see what's happening on the other side of the shopping mall. So talking to him more is not going to help. What you have to do is actually be his brakes. So when his prefrontal cortex is not acting as the brakes yet on his impulses because of his age and brain development, we have to be the brakes. Unfortunately, that means that you need to hold his hand all the time, or he needs to be in a stroller, or you need to get him one of those backpack things that has the leash. Before I had children, I thought that those backpack things with the leashes were terrible. I was probably fairly judgy about parents who use them. And now, honestly, I think they're probably a pretty nice way to give your child freedom of movement so you don't have to be holding onto their wrist or holding their hand all the time, while still you're able to keep track of that they can't get too far away from you. So get one of those backpack things or whatever for times when you want him to be able to walk on his own, so that if he starts to run off, you've got the other end of the string. That and waiting for his brain to develop are pretty much the only things that you can do. I will say that you can help him strengthen whatever impulse control he is capable of by playing games with him where he needs to stop and think before he acts. So games such as freeze tag, or I don't know, my sister and I used to play this game called Mother May I, which is pretty similar to Simon Says, which is another game that you can play. Any of those games, red light, green light, I think What Time Is It, Mr. Fox, any of those games where you have to stop and think, did Simon say do a jumping jack or not? So any of those kinds of games will strengthen the impulse control that he's already capable of. So try playing some of those games with him as a family or whatever, and that might help also. One thing that I will say, if you have a child who's a runner, and this isn't this situation, but I have heard of little kids who will run away because they think it's a game and they think it's fun to have mom or dad or caregiver chase them. If you have a situation like that, if your child's a runner because they think it's funny, chase them at other times. So when it's safe, when you're closed in at the park, or chase them around your kitchen island or living room or whatever, chase them as much as you can at times when it's safe. I know this sounds counterintuitive because you don't actually want them to be running away from you at other times, but I've given this advice so many times over the years, and I always hear back that it has been helpful, in combination with the other things that I said of keeping track of your child by holding their hand or stroller or leash or whatever, but that you can reduce that game playing chasing by filling the need at other times, because that's what it is. It's a child saying, I need you to play with me. I love the fun that happens, the thrill of the chase, quite literally. And so if we fill the need at other times, it's not going to appear at the wrong time. So chase your child as much as possible when it is safe, when you have a playtime, so that they won't decide to play chase in the parking lot. And that is still, you still do, I want to make it clear, need to keep track of them in the ways that I mentioned, but you should see a reduction in the running away for fun at the wrong time. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Our next question is about when a child strongly prefers one parent over another. And in this case, it's mom. I'm just going to read the question. Our girls are 2 and 4. My husband has a really hard time when they prefer me over him. 9 times out of 10, I am the preferred parent. I suspect it is because I see them more than he does. He works earlier and longer than I do, so I pick up the girls and drop them off, etc. He gets pretty upset when they choose me over him to do certain things. For example, our 4-year-old would constantly want me to put her to bed, and he got really upset about it. So now we take turns every night. This has helped a lot, but sometimes she will still ask for me, even though she knows it's Dad's turn that night. My husband got pretty upset the other day when he came home late from work and both girls still really only wanted me. He voiced his feelings to me in front of them, and later I told him he can't do that anymore. I told him I understand it's hard when they don't want you, I get it, but he can't say it in front of them. If he needs to take some time to collect himself and then come back, he should do it, because I don't want them to feel they have to change or stifle their wants or needs for fear it will upset someone else. I could tell our 4-year-old felt so bad afterwards, and I felt so bad for her. First of all, this is really common for a child to have a preferred parent. And what I've read about attachment is that it's really normal for a child to have a primary attachment and a secondary attachment. And in this case, it sounds because you're the main person who's with them all the time, you're their primary attachment. I wonder if telling your partner that just might help in general, that this is normal and that it's also very common, because he might feel like he's the only dad in the world whose kids aren't thrilled and begging him to put them to bed every single night. I also love how you seem to have a lot of empathy for your husband, that you understand how hard this is for him, and that's great. And definitely whatever you say to him, you really want to lead with empathy. We talk about that for kids, and that also goes for everyone in our life, that leading with empathy is really helpful. I love that you've done the every other night, putting dad or mom, putting them to bed. And I think that's great too. I think that it's usually the problem gets worse if we give in to the only mommy thing. And so I love that you've worked out the solution that it's every other night. And this is tricky because you're asking the question, not your partner. But I think what your partner really needs to know is that his children preferring you over him is not a reflection on what a good dad he is or what a good parent he is. And so what he needs to do is tell himself in those hard moments, I'm worthy and lovable, even though my daughter wants her mom instead of me. And this is not a reflection on me as a parent. This sounds like it's a really quite a deep trigger for him of maybe not being loved or not being loved for who he is. And it sounds like it's touching on something deeper for him, or maybe he has an understanding, or he had a story that he told himself about what it would mean when he was a dad, and how if he showed up for his kids, which sounds like he really does, that they would, be giving him a certain amount of love and feedback back. And he's using that as a benchmark for what a kind of a job he's doing, instead of just maybe your feedback to this listener's feedback of that he's a good dad. And so I think he needs to disconnect how he feels about himself as a dad from whether or not his daughters want him to put them to bed. So telling himself in the moment, using that self-compassion, this is really hard, and then I'm worthy and lovable even if my children don't want me to put them to bed. And so doing that internal work is going to be the first step. And then in the moment, I think that he needs to say something to them like, oh my goodness, I know you love your mommy so much. I love your mommy too. Wouldn't it be great if we could just be with her all the time? And then he can show up for them in a really powerful way by saying something like, you know what though, I'm your daddy and I love you and I'm here for you also. And I will always be here for you, even if you're upset. I think that's really important to show him that he's, by being with them, even if they're, quote, rejecting him, he's proving to them from a very young age that he will be there for them no matter what. So maybe you could even turn this over in his mind and let him see that this is actually a positive thing, that this is his chance to show his girls how much he can show up for them, even if they're saying, we want mommy. So just if he can empathize after, hopefully he gets doing some of that internal work so it's not so triggering for him, and then he can empathize with them and then just say, you know what, I'm here for you too. And I also love your thoughts at the end of your question where you said you don't want your daughters to feel responsible for a grown-up's feelings or for anyone's feelings, and that for that matter. We did cover that in one of my earlier episodes. We talked about being a strong leader and why your feelings, but we don't want to teach our kids that they're responsible for our feelings. So I think it's great that you told him that you will listen to his feelings, but it's not appropriate for him to vent those feelings in front of his daughters, that he's the only one who's responsible for his own feelings and getting his needs met, and that they shouldn't have to feel guilty about wanting you. Finally, I would say have them work on connection. I think that would be really great. I don't know if your family does special time. That, of course, is our gold standard of peaceful parenting connection strategy. I know it's sometimes hard for parents to work in special time. We'll link to a guide about that in the show notes. The special time is 15 minutes a day or 10 or 20 or whatever you can manage of one-on-one time with you and your child, where you're saying, I'm all yours for the next 15 minutes. What would you like to play? So if you can get in special time, great. If you can only manage it on the weekends, that's great too. But really, how can we facilitate more connection between your partner and your kids? Working on, and I know you said he works a lot, so maybe just on the weekends would be good special time. But also those daily micro moments of connection that we talk about, maybe you could suggest some of those to him. Delighting in your child, even if your child is saying, I want mommy, not you, he can still let them know how happy he is to be their dad, and let them know with a smile on their face and letting them see the love on his face. So delighting in that special time, all those connection strategies that we know. One more thing I think might be helpful. This is a game that I learned from my mentor, Dr. Laura Markham, and it's called the You Can't Get to Mommy game. And we'll just say mommy because in this case, mom is the preferred parent, but you could say the You Can't Get to the preferred parent game. So at a time when you're all feeling like connected and playful, you can play a game where, say you are listeners sitting on the couch and your partner is in between you and your child, and maybe both of your kids are on the other side of the room. And the game is that they need to run from the other side of the room to get you on the couch, and your partner is going to pretend to try to block them so that they can't get to you. So the idea is, the game is you can't get to mommy, but the idea is that they actually can always get to you because he can't really catch them, or he trips, or he's too slow, and they sneak past him or they run past him, and they joyfully reunite with you on the couch, and he's a sore loser, and I won't let you get there next time. But the big idea here is that when they're laughing about this, maybe some tension around you being the preferred parent, or maybe that he's somehow, they have this unconscious feeling that he's stopping them from being with you, that they get to laugh about that and process all of those feelings. So those are some things you can try. I do hope that you will update me on how this all worked out for you and for your husband. Our final question for today is about when you are raising your kids with peaceful parenting and your family does not approve, your extended family. And again, if you have a question for me, you can either email it to me, sarah@sararosensweet.com, or you can go to my website to the podcast tab. There's a place where you can record a question. I would love to hear your voice and maybe share it and answer your question on the podcast. So this person writes, I'm writing because I grew up in a household with conventional parenting practices. I don't want to raise my 2 kids in the same way, so I've been practicing peaceful parenting. My question is about visiting my family. When I'm at home with my parents and where my brother has 2 kids of similar ages to mine, I find myself with a lot of shame and anxiety about my peaceful parenting choices. I heard my brother pull aside his son, who's 5, and say, I know that G, my son, doesn't listen when his parents talk to him, but you can't do that. You're picking up bad habits and I won't allow it. It is true that if I just ask G, my 4-year-old, to do something, that he often doesn't jump to do it. But I go to him and help him to listen and do as I asked. He isn't afraid of me, so sometimes will express his opinion about what I've asked him to do. I'm okay with all of that because I think that is part of having mutual respect. But in my family, these things look like I don't have control over my child. It's really hard, and I find myself becoming more impatient than I usually do because I feel their judgment and I feel embarrassed. Oh, this is so hard. I totally feel you, and I know that lots and lots of other listeners are going to as well. This is something that I think a lot of us who were raised with conventional parenting come up against, that sort of a judgment about our choices if they weren't the same as our family's choices. And I think that part of it is that they feel like rejected, right? If we're not doing it the same way that they did, then we must think that they did it wrong. So I think there can be that defensiveness and feeling judged on their part. So that's just one thing to maybe give you a little bit more compassion about your parents. You specifically talk about your brother, which, I guess that wouldn't apply. But anyhow, it is good to recognize that people are doing the best they can, even when they're giving us a little bit of a hard time. So I think that one thing that's great is that this problem is mostly internal, that you feel judged and then you feel shame. Nobody's asking you that telling you that you should punish your kids or directly contradicting you or challenging you. So that's great that it's mostly, I'm going to say, in your head. And I know I'm not saying that you're making it up, but I'm saying that the problem is more how you feel about it than it is people are asking you to actually do anything different. So I also want to point out that your kids are cooperating, which is fantastic. You said that your son might not like what you ask him to do, but then you go over and you give him support and scaffolding and you help him to do what you ask. So this is also not a case of you're being judged because your kids actually don't ever do anything that you ask them to do. It's just that you and your brother we'll just talk about your brother. You and your brother have different goals, right? Your brother's goal is actually obedience. That's your brother's goal. And it would be interesting, I don't know what kind of relationship you have with him, but it would be interesting to find out, sure, obedience is really an attractive, tempting thing to think about a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old being obedient and compliant. But when your child is a grown-up, are obedient and compliant words that you would like to hear them described as? Are those qualities that you want your grown-up child to have? So just putting that in perspective and just really recognizing that you and your brother have very different big picture goals, really, that your brother's is obedience and compliance, and that is not your goal. It's interesting, too, that he says he doesn't want his children to pick up bad habits. And really, when you think about it, the bad habit is actually thinking for yourself and having opinions and not just doing what you're told. And I think obedience is probably not a quality that we would really treasure in our adult children. Of course, we want them to be respectful and considerate, but obedient is probably just following orders, probably not what we're looking at. if you are one of my email subscribers, a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago now, I sent out a newsletter about an article that I read in the New York Times, and I think the headline was something like, "Why a little bit of misbehavior might not be such a bad thing." And the author was talking about the research on peaceful parenting versus either permissive or authoritarian parenting. And she said that sometimes when children are, quote, rude and they speak their minds, or they're, as you said, your son isn't afraid to tell you that he doesn't like what you're asking him. She said, actually, the research shows it's really good for our children to do that because it shows that they're not afraid of us. And with that fear-based parenting, there are all sorts of bad outcomes that the research shows are associated with fear-based parenting. So I don't know if that might make you feel a little bit better. And by the way, if you don't get my emails and you want to, you can go to sararosensweet.com/newsletter if you would like to get my emails. We'll also put that in the show notes, that link. Every week I send out a dose of support or something for you to think about. And I've been told that my emails are really valuable. And my dentist, actually, hi, Dr. Brown, told me the other day that she wakes up on Saturday mornings really looking forward to getting the email of the day. So I think we just have to think about when you go to visit your family, think about the big picture. What am I trying to do here? What kind of kids do I want to raise? What kind of relationship do I want to have with them? And keep that in your mind, because you're going to have to give yourself a lot of compassion, because I'm not going to say they're not judging you. It sounds like they are judging you, but you don't have to take that on. I guess that's my point here. You don't have to take that on. Give yourself compassion. This is hard. I feel like my brother and my parents are judging me. And what I want you to say to yourself when these feelings come up, and this is, by the way, what's making you impatient, because you're getting a little bit hijacked and dysregulated by the shame feeling that comes up when you're judged and embarrassed. So when we feel shame, that's a horrible, overwhelming feeling, and it can cause us to go into fight, flight, or freeze. And so maybe that's what's making you a little bit more impatient with your kids. So to get out of that dysregulated state, even if it's mild, I want you to remember two big things. One is my loyalty lies with my children. It matters more what they think than it matters what my brother thinks. So you can ask yourself or tell yourself, where does my loyalty lie? To remind yourself of that bigger picture. And also I want you to repeat this to yourself. Even though my brother or my parents are judging my parenting, I am still worthy and lovable. That's the anti-shame saying, or anti-shame mantra that we can say to ourselves. Even though I am being judged, or my brother and my parents are judging my parenting, I am still worthy and lovable. Because you are. Both those things are true. They are judging you. They are judging your parents' parenting. They don't have the same big picture that you do. And maybe they don't even understand about peaceful parenting. And you are still worthy and lovable. So keeping those two things in mind, that your loyalty lies with your children, and also that you're worthy and lovable even though they're judging you. I hope that will give you a little bit more peace of mind and patience and compassion for yourself when you are visiting. And finally, depending on your relationship with your brother, I would maybe talk to him and just say, you know what, brother, I love you so much. I love spending time with you. I think your kids are great. And I would really appreciate it if you didn't talk badly about my parenting to your kids. I heard what you said the other day, and I don't say bad things about your parenting to my kids. And just maybe have this sort of agree to disagree thing. We can love each other without agreeing on everything. And I think it's fair to ask somebody to not trash talk you and trash talk your parenting. So if, depending on your relationship with him, you might be able to say something like that in a loving way, or maybe you can write him a note or something. But just saying, I recognize that we have different ideas where it comes to parenting, and that's okay. We can still love each other and spend time together. Let's not say anything about each other's parenting to our kids or in front of each other. I think that would be a fair thing to ask. And I think, honestly, if more people did that in our world and our community today, we'd all be a lot better off, that we can love each other despite our differences. And just one, I know I already said finally, but one final note. When you said your family thinks you don't have control over your children, that's okay. That's not our goal, right? You don't have control over your children. That's not the thing that we're going for. We don't want a control-based relationship. We want to think about coaching and supporting our children to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and because they care about us and they care about our relationship, and they want to do the right thing, not because they're afraid that they need to be obedient or they won't be loved. So just, yeah, you don't have control over your kids, and that's okay. That's not what we're going for. We're going for coaching and supporting and working on building that sweet relationship so that we do have the mutual respect that you've talked about. I hope that was helpful for everyone, and please feel free to send me your questions. Check out the How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids course at sarahrosenSweet.com/yelling. If you find this podcast helpful, tell a friend. We can reach more people and make more of a difference in the world, one family at a time. So take a screenshot, text it to a couple of people, and maybe we'll get some new peaceful parenting people to help us spread the word. So it won't seem so unusual when we're doing this out in the world, and we won't feel embarrassed that we don't, quote, have no control over our children. Okay, I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.